for joining us again, and I hope this message will be encouraging and helpful to you, as well as allowing you to discover something about Jesus and what it is to follow him. Our church building isn't open at the moment, so we're doing a number of activities on Zoom, including our children's work. So if you want to find out more details, do get in touch with us. Our contact details are at the end of the talk and listed below. We hope to be able to plan a phased opening of our building, but we will let you know when that will be, and will of course be based on government guidelines. Over the past few weeks, we've been looking at some of the ways that Jesus can help us when we feel out of control. We've reminded ourselves that when we don't feel God, it's not because he is absent, apathetic or angry with us. We've looked at what it is to have a thorn in our sides and learned to see it as a gift with a purpose and a promise. And last week we looked at on our own we can't, but with Jesus we can find contentment. And today I'd like to focus on a game we all like to play, the blame game. Whose fault is it? Ever played that one? And I wonder how you're getting on in lockdown with all the people you're with. Has it been plain sailing or people doing things to annoy you? Maybe you've been playing the blame game with why there is a virus and a lockdown. Somewhere in us there is a desire to be able to blame someone for everything that happens when we don't like it. Our bad decisions aren't our fault, are they? We can all be good at the blame game. And there are those of you who are also really good at blaming yourselves for the amount of stuff that goes on. But the vast majority of us don't like to blame ourselves. It's always someone else's fault, and we're very slow to take our share of the responsibility pie. So when things start to go wrong, we don't look at what did I do or how did I create this problem. Rather we go, who did, why me? Or rather it was somebody else other than me, and we certainly don't deserve what is happening. And something tells me that some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. When we feel out of control, it's our natural reaction to focus on what's wrong, to attempt damage control or to go into problem-solving mode. And even the disciples in the New Testament did this. When they saw something wrong, they naturally wondered why and started asking questions, which, to be fair, was understandable because in Exodus and Deuteronomy, we find the teaching and the understanding that God was the one who gave and also took away illnesses to motivate his people to obey him. So we can't be too harsh on them. That was the religious thinking and belief at the time. But Jesus came and changed all of this. God knew he had to work on people's hearts, not through a legal system to help motivate them to live as he would wish them to. And we pick up the story in John 9, and Jesus is teaching his new disciples this good news that illness and sickness is not part of the blame game, and in actual fact, something far greater is involved. And all of this might just help change the way we think about our circumstances as well. The implications of this question, and specifically the answer, are huge for those of us as we look for someone to blame. In verses 1 to 2, we find Jesus walking with a couple of his disciples. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" This is such an awkward encounter, isn't it? The disciples are so eager to ask Jesus their question that they forget that they are standing right next to the blind man that they are talking about. I can't help but think this blind man was mind his own business and hears a few people walk up near him, and he hears one of them ask, "Rabbi, who messed up to cause this man to be born blind?" And the blind man probably turned his attention toward them and was like, "Really? I'm right here, guys. I can hear you." And back to their question. Was it this man or his parents that caused this? When they saw something bad had happened, it was completely normal for them to wonder why. Who was to blame? It sounds like a question that you or I would ask, doesn't it? God, what went wrong? This isn't what was supposed to happen. Why me? Why now? Are you even there? Why is this man suffering? Why is his life not perfect? Now, thankfully, when the disciples asked Jesus, where did things go wrong? He didn't say it was anyone's fault or point the finger. And Jesus didn't say it was this man's fault, that God is mad at him for something he did and he's punishing him and he doesn't want this man to experience joy or have a good life. Jesus didn't say those things. but what he did say may just help us in those times when there might not seem like there is hope. In verse 3, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. Jesus doesn't even seem to get distracted by their question. Instead, he's starting to help them look at the question in a slightly different way. He can sense that they are wanting to know where things went wrong and who's to blame. But he's also about to show them that they're focused on the wrong thing. In verse 3, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. If you've read this story before, you know that Jesus performs a miracle and heals the man of his blindness. But that's not what this story is all about. The story isn't about righting a wrong. It's not a physical wrong that needed to be put right so that this man could be restored, because that will keep us in the wrong thinking. This story is about the disciples focusing on what went wrong and Jesus stopping them and saying, God can be on display in this man as he is, and the same is true for us. We do not have to be perfect, and our lives do not have to be perfect for God to be reflected in us. God can be on display in my rubbish circumstances and in your circumstances. While God can be on display in our situation, it's quite possible that God is already on display and we don't even realise it. You probably know the beauty of hindsight. Many times when we look back on something, we can see God working, but we weren't able to see it in the moment. You know why? Because when you focus on what's wrong, you lose sight of what God makes right. Our ways are not God's ways. His perspective might be different than ours. And that's something really important that we have to keep in mind. Your idea of making something right may not be God's idea of making something right. When we realise this, our view, our perspective can begin to change. When we just focus on what went wrong, we miss what God is actually working on. In 1999, I had a cancer scare, and it took a while to understand the nature of the illness and the treatment that I would need. The process and all, thankfully, only lasted about 5 months. And it was one of those times when your life flashes before your eyes and you switch from being really scared and then really calm about it. And you do wonder, why is this happening to me? What about my children? What about all the things I wanted to do with my life? In the very early stages, it was easy to think that it was the worst thing to ever happen to me. But what it did do was make me think of what was important to me, what really mattered, and that if that was the case, then I needed to make some changes, and I did. Something that was difficult has actually made my life much better. And I think because I shifted my attitude to what was important in my life, God was able to work in me and lead me to where He wanted me to be. I don't think I would be here sharing with you today if I had not made the changes and seen it as God at work in me. I wonder if during this lockdown time you've been able to think about your life, your friends and family, your job, or your finances in this way. Where is God in your circumstances rather than what's gone wrong? Is what was normal life for you something that you want to go back to? If you could click your fingers and be back to the 1st of January 2020 and then live the rest of the year how you thought it would pan out, would you? Or have you learned something about yourself and your life over the past couple of months that you are thinking, I'm definitely changing that? Maybe being locked down with your family, you realise your relationships have lacked a bit of effort and they're not what you thought they were. Maybe you've had a time to really take stock of your finances and you realise you have a bit of work to do to help you save more and spend less. Maybe you realise the job you've been putting all your time and effort into is not the be-all and end-all after all. And I wonder if actually the lockdown could be the best thing for you. Imagine for a second if we shift our focus from who is to blame and why me to what is God making right. How would that change the way you look at your job, your family and your health? How would that change the way you look at your life and your circumstances? How much weight would be lifted off our shoulders if we didn't have to worry about that anymore? What would happen if you believed that God could take a situation that you feel is impossible and do something beautiful? What would happen if the people around you saw the hope of Jesus on display in the midst of your seemingly insurmountable circumstances? What if God is giving you a story to tell and an audience to tell it to? And I realise this isn't easy. I know that many of your circumstances make my life seem easy, but I need you to know something. It's possible. No matter how dark it seems, no matter how far God feels, no matter how hopeless it looks, you can make it through this. I believe you can see God on display in your circumstances. I never would have had asked for the scare I went through 21 years ago, but I also wouldn't trade any of it. What I've learnt about myself, my priorities have been so valuable, and I pray that will be the same for you during this lockdown. What have we learnt? Where have we seen God that we would have missed if the lockdown hadn't happened? So I wonder, what would happen in our lives if we realised that God is not absent, apathetic or angry? He hasn't abandoned us. What would happen in our lives if we received adversity as a gift with a purpose and a promise? What would happen in our lives if we learnt the secret of contentment, or a dog barking, or that Christ is in you, empowering you? And what would happen in our lives if we trusted that God can make right that which seems so wrong? Why not give it a go and see how your life changes? So take care, be safe, and may God bless you richly. Until next time, go in peace.